let's go ahead and get the conversation started here. So first of all, thank you for coming. I think this is the third or fourth one of these that we've done. I don't really keep track very well. But I appreciate all of you taking the time to be here tonight and to engage in the V8 process. I'm hoping we've got some people here who are both supporters, and then some people here who are on the fence or who have some reservations, so that we can get a good conversation and good feedback. Again, if you've got any questions, if there's anything that you want to share, or if there's any feedback that you think we need to hear, you should start by putting that in the chat window, and we'll recognize you in turn to speak. So now is the time to start putting those in there. If it's already been covered, that's okay. You can still put it in there. We'll still talk about it. If we think something's been over-covered, we may not bring it up multiple times, but we'll at least bring it up once. This is being recorded, and this will be shared out, so any stupid things that I say or anything that you want to hold against us, you'll have an opportunity to do that at a later date. Yeah, in addition to what's on ESAM or Facebook, or something that is on ESAM or Facebook that you just want to get into the queue beforehand, really, sky's the limit. One thing that I do want to start off by talking about, because I think it is very relevant, is there was a comment by Michael Purser, which I don't know who that is, on the Facebook earlier today or yesterday or something like that, about the comment of, isn't the design goal of V8 to make everybody happy, essentially, or something like that. And that's actually an interesting philosophical question, and I think it's actually worth getting into. I just want to take a couple of minutes and talk about it, just because it's of interest to me, and I'm running the chat, and you are my prisoners. Basically what it comes down to is no, that's not our goal. Our goal is not actually to make people particularly happy. Our goal is actually to produce a system which is fair and balanced and enjoyable for everybody. And it needs to also be challenging and interesting. For instance, if you've played video games that are very easy or very straightforward, or board games that don't take a lot of interesting thought, or they don't have a lot of challenge to them, you lose interest pretty quickly. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to balance people's desires to feel powerful and to have options and do things against the need to make the game meaningfully challenging. Because if it's not challenging, people lose interest, they go off, they do other things. So it needs to be challenging as well as tactically interesting, and it needs to be fair and balanced in such a way that, unlike Fox News, everyone has an even playing field, right? I mean, if we take something away from one class and give it to another, it has a meaningful impact on the entire field of play. Likewise, if we give something to just one class, it really does depress everyone else's power level in relation to them. I mean, if we gave a whole bunch of crap to one class, like if we started giving Monk 5 points of armor or something, it would create a real situation where Monk would be the go-to class because everything else would be less powerful in relation. So it's more complicated whenever we're making any change than just, well, why won't you do this? It'll make more people happy. It's, well, it'll make more people of a specific stripe happy, but we need to consider the system as a whole, because a balanced and engaging system in totality is a lot better for the game than making this group or that group of players happy, quote unquote. Cord, Medrin, Roger, is there anything you want to add to any of that? I was extemporizing.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't paying attention when I was typing stuff up.
Asshole.
No, I think that was actually a pretty good synopsis of how we all feel about
it. I think that's accurate, and it very much covers kind of what some of the discussion that we've had elsewhere about, producing the best product that we possibly can, and our goal here being to produce a well-balanced, good quality rule system, and realizing that sometimes that's going to make some people less than pleased in certain areas. But our goal is to really look at the whole systemic approach and try to make sure that it is the best product that we can put out there for the game as a whole.
All right, cool. I'm glad we all get to throw our 2 cents in on that. Before we get into these questions, is there any questions that you guys have in general about the design principles that we use to determine what changes are made and what content goes in or goes out? Or are there any questions or any specific parts of game design that you'd like us to ruminate about? Because we're happy to talk shop. I kind of really enjoy it. All right, well, we'll move on to the first question, and if anyone thinks of anything, you can go ahead and throw it into the chat there, and we'll come back to it. All right, number 1, Robert Mott Jr. This is from Facebook, I think. Is that Robin? Cord, Medrin, Robert Mott Jr., is that Robin?
Rafiki? No.
Okay, some different guy. Anyways, I wear a suit of chainmail. It gets -1 for small gauge rings. I can't then go put a gambeson on to get that point back to correct. That is not correct. The cap on armor is a +1 cap total. So no matter how many modifiers you have, positive or negative, you can end up with +1 over the base. So you could have aluminum chainmail that had rings that were too big, which would get down to 0, and then you could wear a helmet and a gambeson, and then use, heavier gauge rings and, I don't know, do a 6-in-1 weave, and you could get back to 4 points. All right, Cord, why don't you take the next one?
All right, so it looks like, let me get over here. All right, give me just 1 second to get to the right portion of the document.
If you like, I can read the questions for you guys who are answering.
Oh, that'd be perfect. Do that.
Okay, the next question is from S. Boyd Taylor. Again, I don't know who that is, but the question is, a warrior has a hardened shield and is wearing 3 points of ancestral blessed armor on his arms and torso. He is shot in the shield with a pinning arrow, in parentheses, engulfing. What happens?
Say something, Cord.
I'm trying to. I got too many windows open and I keep accidentally writing onto the document. All right, so in this particular instance, yes, that is one of the things that we actually had discussed and decided upon, is the ancestral armor only actually works when the strike is against the armor itself. If the pinning arrow does strike the shield, the pinning arrow is actually engulfing, and that will actually cause the individual to be pinned. They will not lose any armor from that shot, but they will be basically stopped. So in that particular instance, it is a choice. You have the ability to either take the shot to the shield and be pinned, or you can take the shot to the actual armor, which basically causes the pinning arrow to fizzle and just counts as a single point.
And as an addendum to that, one of the things that does is it gives the warrior more flexibility, but it also means that blessed armor can still be countered by an archer, which is good. Otherwise, you could just run them down and murder them in the face. But also, it encourages considering styles other than just sword and board. If you happen to be running with blessed armor on, it can actually become worthwhile or still equally viable to do something like take up a greatsword or run a pole, rather than being shield reliant. So it's just kind of some of the interesting things that happen from that. All right, Roger, give Medrin the next one.
Medrin, this question comes from Stephen Alexander Shaver. The word touch implies that you can actually touch yourself and apply enchantment. Would a word like other be a better replacement?
I think this question was answered pretty thoroughly on Facebook, but the short answer is other as a range doesn't really work, because when we're talking about touch, we're talking about the range of the spell, or range of the magic. And so if we go with something like other, that doesn't, I understand the point of meaning another person as opposed to self, but touch is much more effective. Because, yes, technically you can touch yourself, but in the case of enchantments, it's spelled out pretty clearly that only enchantments with a range of self can be used on yourself. Any other touch ability or spell can be used on yourself, and frankly, if you want to touch yourself, go right ahead.
All right, awesome. So V8 in favor of touching yourself. I think we're on the record for that. Let's take a question from someone who's actually... no, I think actually you can touch yourself while insubstantial, I think.
Oh, I didn't say different states. I said no special powers for touching yourself.
Oh, I see.
Brennan, you want to move to ones from people who are here and do those first instead of the ones from online?
Yeah, let's take one from someone here. I think maybe Boy Scout Storm has the first one that's here.
Howdy. So many people have probably seen the posts, but my point is that as a new player, it is very daunting to start out as a level 1 and stay a level 1 for 13 events. My idea is to have a sliding scale for levels for the first few levels, maybe 1, 2, and 3, to where you get the levels earlier than later, and that way we can have, one, give experienced people an incentive to try different classes instead of just staying one class. You kind of feel locked into a class if you've spent so much credits into it, and you don't want to go down to level 1 again, because that's just not fun. So you stay your class and you sometimes get bored. And the other thing would be allow more newer players to start learning things and start trying to be a part of the team and start feeling not so helpless at the very beginning.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I saw your thread on Facebook, and you know, I read that and I took it back to our secret V8 committee hidey hole, and yeah, we sort of kicked that around. And for me, it was kind of a well duh moment. Like, that was clearly something that we should have done. So thank you for that. That's awesome. And we're definitely looking at doing something like that. And we've all got kind of different opinions about it, but it's certainly something that I think at this point we're pretty certain we're going to implement. We've got a couple of different ways we're going to do that, in terms of, you know, what do the specific level breaks look like. That's still a little up in the air, but I think right now what we're kicking around is like 0 to 4 weeks, and then... Cord, do you remember what it is?
I don't actually remember what it is, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up our discussion here and see if I can get the numbers for you. Hold on one moment.
What was it? 0 to 4 level 1, 5 to 11 level 2, 12 to 20 level 3.
Microphone, Roger.
Yeah, my bad. Anyways, I got it pulled up. Level 1 was listed as 0 to 4, level 2, 5 to 11, 3, 12 to 20, and then 4 was 21 to 33, 5, 34 to 52, and 6, 53 plus.
So the actual proposition that we're bandying about actually cuts, like, I don't know, 7 credits off of the time it takes to get to 6th. And the reason that we're doing that, or at least the reason that we're thinking about it, and this is all just a proposal at this point, is twofold. First of all, it won't screw anyone who is currently in between levels. Like, it won't cause anyone who is currently level 5 to fall back to level 4, for instance, because that would be a complete non-starter and it's really not fair. The other reason is because it takes it to a nice conceptually round number. So if you've been playing for a year, you're going to be level 6, right? Which that gives a real tangible goal for newer players, which is also the reason we went 0 to 4, because that's a month, typically. If you play for a month solid, you make it out once a week, you move to level 2. So anyways, that's kind of what we're kicking around. But yeah, that I think we all thought that was a pretty good idea. Medrin, how did you feel about it? You haven't commented.
I like it. I think it's again, it was kind of a duh moment for, of course, why haven't we thought about doing that? And I think the dropping it to a year is something that is a good thing for us to look at. I don't know what those numbers do specifically to people with their various credits. I mean, it may result in some people getting bumped when they, obviously, but I think it's certainly a good proposal, and I think it's something that we're very definitely looking at.
Yeah, so it's not like it's written in stone or anything, but you had a good idea and we're stealing it.
Feel free to take it.
As a follow-up, Goran posted something about wondering whether or not a different credit scale would be a hot button item for the COM.
That's a really good question, and it's something that's worth thinking about. The answer is we don't know. The reason that, again, as I just a little bit touched on, one of the reasons we're cutting the number down is because we can avoid moving anyone down a level, because we think that would be a big non-starter. But we think that this mostly keeps people where they are and would move some newer players up a level or two. Most people aren't going to complain about that. I don't know. I don't think it should become a political issue, because we're not talking about affecting credits for voting members or anything like that. Do you have some more background you want to give us on that, Goran, or do you have some more commentary you want to give us? That's a valid concern, and it's one of those things that if we take it to the COM, or if we take it out there and the feedback that we get about it is, oh my god, what the fuck are you doing? We can get rid of it. But honestly, I don't think it's going to do that. I don't think it would endanger the odds of the rule set passing.
We intend to blame Boy Scout Storm if they have any complaints.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll send the hate mail his way. Do we have any more questions on that thread or that item that we can handle while we're here, Roger?
The only related one I see is Boy Scout Storm asking, what's the COM? It's the Circle of Monarchs.
It's the thing that kills my Saturday at Clan every year.
Really quickly, if anybody out there has not actually been involved in this process from the very beginning, we did actually post on the Circle of Monarchs thread on ESAM, or in the Circle of Monarchs forum, kind of the roadmap that we used that helped really kind of determine how we actually went about designing the design process, what sort of goals we had set in place. And I've gone ahead and posted a link to that in the chat. So if you haven't actually seen that information, feel free to look at that. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit of an idea of what has driven some of the decisions that we've actually made through this process.
All right, Roger. Grab another question from someone who's here.
Bowen had a question about Druid enchantments. Bowen, you hear?
So basically, my question was when Druid first released, it was pretty clear that some of the enchantments were ridiculously overpowered, and through playtesting, they've been reduced to I think a reasonable point here. But I think it's kind of odd that Druid, being so enchantment focused, or at least being able to play that way, has no access to persistent. So I was just curious, in general, if there was any plans to look at giving persistent back to druids, since they're the ones throwing out enchantments ideally most of the time.
Okay, good question, actually. I remember the reason we did this. I want to see if anyone else remembers the reason we did this. Cord, Medrin, Roger.
Part of the circle of life that druids are all about.
Okay, that's a nice fluff piece. Cord, Medrin.
I remember discussing it, and I remember deciding to get rid of it, but I don't remember our specific reasoning behind.
All right, cool. Cord?
If I remember correctly from our discussion, I think part of the reason for this was we were trying to actually make it so that in certain instances spellcasters actually had to work together. So rather than giving all of the tools to one spellcaster to let them basically provide or buff someone else there, this way the druid actually has to be able to coordinate with another spellcaster in order to be able to really make those buffs last for the long term. Or am I thinking of a completely different conversation?
You may be thinking of a different conversation since you can't use persistent on enchantments that you're not personally casting.
And I don't remember if this was the actual reason, but I can tell you that persistent with things like Essence Graft and Attuned can be problematical.
Yeah, that was the reason. Basically, the combination of enchantments that Druid gets are so incredibly powerful that with persistent that our option was either we need to turn down the power of the enchantments further, or we needed to take away persist. So what we kind of did is we hit upon this middle ground where Druid actually does get access to persistence. If you check out Golem, and I think Juggernaut, let me check there. Is that still in there? All right, Golem. Anyways, if you check out Golem, all enchantments that are worn by the bearer of Golem, including Golem, are persistent, period. So basically what it came down to is Druid gets one of the more powerful forms of persistence, in that it does a whole bunch of other stuff and it applies to all the enchantments worn. There's some restrictions on how they have to use it because handing out a whole bunch of persistent enchantments was very, very powerful. But one of the themes that we really looked at for Druid was sort of a Build-A-Bear workshop with monsters and enchantments. And Golem really lends itself to that, so it's kind of thematically interesting.
And I can certainly see that now. I think part of the issue was I missed the change where Golem was no longer limited to a range to the cast.
Yeah, Golem doesn't really have a whole lot of negative effects at this point.
Makes total sense. Thanks, Ray.
All right, next up, Masao, you had a question about monks not getting access to light and heavy thrown weapons.
Basically, I was wondering, why is it the monks are walking around with much larger throwing weapons when smaller ones would be easier for them to carry in large groups?
I believe one of the... I just want to try to feel that. We were trying to get a signature item for each class, and the light throwing weapons, I think, was one of the things we identified as a signature item for assassins. That's the way I recall it.
And your question actually kind of answered itself, because if we let them have throwing weapons, it would be much easier for them to carry a lot of them.
So it's another one of those balance things, right?
I'm not hearing a lot of complaints about monks being underpowered in V8 right now.
But yeah, it's definitely a balance item, Masao. It's a balance, not actually against monks, but in favor of assassins, if that makes sense.
They do need some... Or they did.
They're pretty cool now.
Yeah, I like the changes on Assassin.
All right, what do we got next, Roger?
All right, one sec. Oh, hold on, I messed up my document. Just give me a sec. Jiraiya had a question about terms for blessed armor.
Okay, where when blah blah blah. Where's that one?
The question he had was, can we get a better or easier term for blessed armor effects other than referring to an enchantment unique to one class?
All right, Jiraiya, can you kind of explain what you're talking about there?
Sure. So in DOA we have, I think it's enhanced armor. I put it in there, which does the same kind of thing as blessed armor, but it's codified. It's right there in the list. I don't need to go looking for something weird. And we have all these abilities in V8 now that refer to blessed armor effects: the stone skin, iron skin, ancestral armor. And it basically says, hey, go look at this healer enchant because... And I just think it would be easier if we could say this is what it is instead of, hey, go read this enchantment.
So, Jiraiya, one thing, the way we've actually got V8 laid out currently is not the way it's going to be when we actually do distribute the book itself. The people who are actually working on the formatting for it are planning on basically having all of the abilities set right there next to everything. So you basically have the entire class and all of the abilities listed on just one page in the rulebook. And so the discussion of Blessed Armor is going to be right there next to the Warrior discussion, and then it'll also be in the enchantments double.
Well, I think what he's saying, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but what he's saying is he's hoping that we could create a term, for lack of a better word, like blessed armor, meaning blessed armor is armor that that takes 1 point of damage from anything that hits it. And then what happens is the healer enchantment, instead of saying gets armor that does X, Y, and Z, it says the bearer's armor is blessed, or the bearer's armor is invulnerable. Is that what you're asking, Jiraiya?
Exactly.
Why haven't we done that? Let me see. Well, we could do that. We could add that to a glossary or something like that. One of the things that we're trying to avoid doing is having kind of a glossary in the sense that we're trying to have all of the terms be self-describing, contained within the actual rules themselves. In V7, a lot of things aren't described in a useful way, so you have to have a glossary which is, a set of definitions. And we're trying to stay away from that. But we could certainly create something like, blessed armor or invulnerable armor or something like that. But it's just, it feels less clean when reading it, right? Like in V7, you've got to go look up things in the glossary constantly to actually understand how the rules work. In V8, we're kind of trying to avoid that.
I prefer a term like invulnerable to blessed because there's a certain RP connotation with it.
And B, I totally understand that, but as it stands now, Jiraiya is kind of right. You have to you still have to do the referencing. So for example, if you're trying to figure out what Stone Skin does, you get Stone Skin cast on you, which gives you 2 points of magical blessed armor, and then you have to go to the healer spell to look up what blessed armor is. But we could make it like either maybe a state or a special effect that said armor with this state or special effect on it has the following effects.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely do that, but if we make it part of the general rules, so if we make it part of states or special effects or whatever, then it's something that, if we put it in the special effects, we're essentially saying, well, everyone needs to know this. Where if, as it is currently right now, people who need to know it are limited to warriors, I guess of 6th level or whatever level they get blessed armor at, and people who are voluntarily choosing to receive stone skin and I think iron skin, and then of course the blessed armor enchantment. So I mean, we can always put that in the everyone must know it section, but it doesn't imply a burden on people who otherwise probably wouldn't use it. It's just something to consider. I'm not necessarily for it or against it. I don't know. It's an interesting, I guess, philosophical discussion. So to answer your question, we hadn't really thought about it, and obviously we've got some back and forth discussion that we should probably do about it before we really give you an answer.
Okay, if we're done with that one, the next up I have is Anton, who has a question about counters and small parks. Anton?
Medjord, why don't you field this?
I can see how that's a problem in small parks, but I would think what that's going to do is it may be a self-correcting problem, because I think people are going to get tired of getting murdered by the wizard, and so they're going to start leveling up the hard counter, whether that's going as a monk or going as one of the other listed counters that specifically is able to target wizards. So I understand that in small parks you may not have that 6th level monk who's skilled enough to counter that 6th level wizard, and that's a tough situation. But comparatively, it's a better situation we have now, where there's a possibility to counter that 6th level wizard by leveling up or getting somebody in who fits the right role, as opposed to V7, where if you had somebody who was a really skilled wizard, people were there wasn't a hard counter to him at all. Does that make sense, and does that answer your question?
And I think that's probably valid. I think it's also worth noting that there's a lot of counters to wizard that aren't hard, that are just sort of break-evens. For instance, archer is actually a pretty good soft counter to wizard. They're kind of a break-even. Barbarian doesn't do too bad. There's a number of options there, and ultimately you can always just hit the son of a bitch with a stick, right?
Or hold a no magic game, or just do a game where you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you end up with a warrior with 6 points of plate, running blessed armor and using true grit to keep it on, it's going to be hard to stop that guy, especially if you've got an entire field full of monks. And if your entire field wants to play monks and get raffle stomped by the guy wearing 6 points of plate, they could choose to do that. But hopefully, part of V8 will, to encourage some more diversity and encourage people to play multiple classes based on the topography of the field that they're looking at.
You're going to have to make some sacrifices on a small field anyway, until you get more people. And part of that could just be, asking the guy not to do that, do a battle game where he plays something else that time just for the sake of balance.
But I think it is an interesting point. So let's actually back up here. Anton, do you have an idea for a suggestion on what would fix it? Yeah, and I think you're right. And as Medrin identified, the ironic part of this is it becomes more evident because we have it's not really rock, paper, scissors, but it's at least, some things counter other things. Even though the old system doesn't have that, and the 6th level wizard, for instance, just stomps your field no matter what's going on. But it's just not as evident because you just kind of expect that, right?
You could throw ditch team switching on top of a battle game, perhaps, if you needed to counter.
Well, it was rock, paper, shotgun, right? And the wizard was the shotgun? Oh yeah, definitely so, and I completely agree with you. I think one of the things you identified is game design does do a lot of it. I mean, if you run hold the location games, a warrior in 6 points of plate has a pretty good advantage because he's not moving a lot. He can just camp the location. If you're running things like, heavy object or capture the flag, that dude in 6 points of plate's at a disadvantage even if he's unstoppable in combat.
And I think that brings up a really important point that we've been talking about in terms of V8, that a lot of the problems that we see in current incarnation and in any gaming scenario is that you've got to be really conscious of your game design. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't just throw a game together and see how it works, but it does mean that because V8 gives so many more tools for game design, good game design becomes really important in having a good game experience.
That's actually something we're talking about in running V8 playtests is working on the game design that people use and testing it as well.
All right, let's see. So what's the next one?
I just want to quickly apologize. I just realized every time I'm using Control key to bold something in the document I'm editing, I'm also turning on my mic, so apologies for that. All right, our next question we have here is Saul had a question about Silver Tongue.
All right, Saul, go ahead. Saul. All right, skip him, come back to it.
Well, I can read his question. Has Silver Tongue nerfing been addressed with the revising of Swift? I apologize if this has been addressed already. I just joined the session.
Oh, I see. Okay. Let's see. So yeah, we've talked about it. It's one of those things that we don't really think Bard needs something else at 6th level. So if we took it out, we're not likely to put something back in its place. And as such, we just kind of left it where it is. We haven't really made a final decision on that yet. Cord, Medrin, Roger, if you guys want to speak up and give your 2 bits about it, it's still something we're discussing.
I'm kind of really ambivalent. I mean, I hadn't really been aware of it being a big concern. I haven't had much feedback on people saying it was, upset about the nerf. But I mean, I don't know.
I think something else that is kind of tangential to this, and it may have been raised in somebody's Facebook question or on one of the forums, is why we changed Swift the way that we did. And the reality is that Swift on ranged verbals was pretty close to game-breakingly overpowered and resulted in making magic casters with access to Swift and certain magics very, very powerful. And so the toning down was necessary because it's a great idea in theory and it works great on touch magics, but being able to Swift Finger of Death somebody is pretty rough, and it's not a whole lot of fun for the guy who keeps getting Swift Finger of Death.
Or Swift Stun, or Swift Pyrotechnics, or Swift any other verbal, essentially.
Yeah. Or Swift Dispel, which makes all of your enchantments useless.
I see Saul commented that his mic's not working.
Yeah, well, actually, Bard does get stun. He's commenting that terror, agoraphobia, and awe is all that Bard gets. But Swift Stun is pretty powerful. And we could look at, allowing Bard to use Swift the same way or something like that, but we just made the change to Swift as a whole, so it wasn't like we targeted or did not target Bard specifically. But Swift isn't going to change back to the way it was. We can look at replacing Silver Tongue with something else, but again, Bard's pretty good the way it is.
And as a note on having, I'm not dead set against it, but a drawback of having Silver Tongue let Bards use Swift on ranged verbals is then what we've created is an exception to the general rule, and we're working really, really hard to eliminate exceptions to general rules unless they're really necessary.
All right. But thanks for the question. It's a good question and something that we wanted to address, so I'm glad you brought it up. Roger, what do we have next?
Not sure how to pronounce Nidjenga, but has a question regarding healers' request for an additional death spell. Take it away, however you pronounce your name.
It's Nidjenga, but no one gets it right anyway, whatever. But
Can you speak up or move the mic closer?
Is that any better?
Not really. If that's the best you can do, go ahead. We can still kind of hear you.
All right, I'll have to speak up then. As it is right now, healers for Necromancer don't get many abilities, and it is argued that Undead Minion is pretty strong, and I can agree with that. At this point, though, it does have a limitation, and I would actually like to see something to go along with Necromancer, because Warlock has some great abilities, and I don't know, I feel that Necromancer could use something to add to it. I don't have the best argument, but how I feel.
And I think it's a reasonable way to feel. The counter to that is it's 1 point, where I think Warlock is like 2. Let me go look. Yeah, Warlock is 2 points at 6th level, and Necromancer's 1. Necromancer's kind of made to be taken with other stuff.
And realize that Warlock limits you from buying, I think is it Verbals or is it any other magic from Death and Flame? I guess it's Verbals from Death and Flame, where Necromancer really only limits your, it says you can't purchase enchantments from Protection, but you're still able to get all of your Verbals.
Right. I mean, anyways, that's kind of tangential to your point. So you were looking for some sort of other death spell, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go down and see what they've got right now. I don't know off the top of my head.
They suggested vampirism in the chat.
You can blame Colin for vampirism.
We could do that. Let me see here. See, they've got Undead Minion. I think they have Greater Undead Minion. Steel Life Essence. Actually, with Steel Life Essence being chargeable, in addition to being per life, that's actually pretty powerful. I don't think we really want to add anything else to that.
And chargeable vampirism is, no. That basically means you can throw... Yeah.
Let me look. Who has the most death stuff? That's mostly Wizard, right? So they'd have the pretty definitive death list.
Yes, Wizard has 8 right now.
Wounding. Ravage.
Ravage would be hilarious. Drag below, I don't think we need any more of those. Ravage is 3rd level. What's that? That's the one that kills, like, cursed people or something, right?
No, Ravage makes you fragile.
We could do that. You want to make people fragile? Well, I didn't ask you, Josh. I asked didn't get. I don't care.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Alright, it's kind of like a reverse preemptive wounding thing. Okay, put that in our notes, we'll look at it. No promises, but it seems fairly innocuous.
If you combine the two, it essentially turns into a per life Finger of Deaths.
Alright, Roger, what's the next one?
Boy Scout Storm has a question about NBA basketballs.
Yes.
No, they're not legal.
Again. So as of right now, I've built several rocks, and looking at the rules being 12 inches in every direction, that's pretty large. It's very large. I see what you want to make rocks big, which is good because they should be hard to handle, and you shouldn't be able to like really quiver them and just be throwing them all the time. I don't know. My thought was to have a volume or some other kind of definition of rocks so that people can build different things, silly things like bananas and fruit, and throw them at people.
Like Archimedes?
Sure.
I mean, we're not going to do water displacement, but I mean, I see what you mean, though.
Wait a minute, so let's back up. Your literal concern is that we don't have enough throwing fruit.
Yes, that is my concern.
And that he sees 12 inches in every direction.
That and 12 inches it's pretty large.
I think we stole that from V7, is that right?
No, I came up with that because we were talking about rocks needing to be unwieldy intentionally.
How big are they in V7?
I was trying to get them to be a two-handed kind of thing, where like the actual hurled with both hands type of thing.
Rocks in V7 show 1 foot in diameter.
So it's the same thing, right?
Yes. To play devil's advocate, I mean, if you allow random shapes, it'd be just putting a simple handle on a ball would give you something that's much more wingable.
Well, and 1 foot in diameter, I think we went to the 1 foot in every dimension because 1 foot diameter is a little unclear in that you're assuming a rock is round, but I suppose you could make a disc that is 1 foot in diameter that's technically a legal rock in V7.
I think you could easily make it bigger than a foot in diameter as long as the center of the mass was that big that you could definitely go for odd shapes that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically a foot in diameter is less than a cubic foot, right? So it's not, 144 times 12, whatever that is, cubic inches.
Pi r squared, what?
The rocks I have are bigger than 1 cubic foot, but if you measured them, and you could find one dimension that's less than 12. And that's my concern, is it's very hard to build something that's not a ball to be bigger than 12 inches around.
Would you rather we say 1 cubic foot?
I that would be pretty good. Pretty easy to measure or try to measure.
Let me think about that. The nice thing is about a round object that is 1 foot in diameter is it's real simple to measure. I agree with you that cubic foot would probably allow for a lot more cool stuff and probably achieve the same level of shittiness in terms of using it. But my concern is it would be difficult to adjudicate in a simple way.
One thing, I mean, in general, even with V7, I don't see rocks very often, and it was almost to the point where it was so seldom that I'd see them that it was almost pointless for them to even be in the rulebook, in my opinion. And anything we can do to encourage more rocks, I think, is a good thing.
Yes, they were quite fun to make, and I really enjoy throwing them around.
All right, we'll add that to our discussion list. If we can find a convenient way to, or if we don't think it will be too difficult for people to adjudicate like 1 cubic foot, then we can work something out with that. I don't have any inherent objection to other unwieldy shapes for rocks.
My idea is bigger than a basketball. That's why I mentioned the NBA basketball is 10 inches in diameter everywhere, which way?
Yeah, but for instance, like a baby grand piano wouldn't pass that test. It's smaller than a, basketball in 1 dimension. If anyone wants to make a throwing baby grand piano and take it out to their field, I will personally tell you that is legal. Go for it.
Challenge accepted.
Just make sure the legs of the piano are actually, large enough.
And make sure it's in tune.
You can use the attuned enchantment for that.
Haha, you're terrible.
So I'm trying to think
not
of
a whole
potential
lot
ways that we
less.
could address that, and one that I'm thinking of is that it must have at least a 12-inch cross section in all 3 dimensions. Then that way, if you want to put like holes in it or something like that, or divots, you can do so without actually causing an issue with the 12-inch across option. What is that? Do you guys think that's a possibility?
What about 2 dimensions? Because if we do 3, you end up with like a caltrip kind of thing. If you do 2 dimensions, then at the very least you end up with a super enormous throwing star, which I think I'd also be okay with. Right? Like it's a 1 foot diameter disc, which we were kind of concerned about in V7. Well, honestly, a 1 foot diameter disc is probably not that bad.
I don't know. I'm not terribly comfortable with the idea of actually allowing basically frisbees for as actual rocks or throwing weapons.
I have to see it when that's aerodynamic before I call it a frisbee.
We had a zombie rain, and I made some throwing records that actually worked pretty well.
All right, well, it'll make all those Xena people happy.
Well, let's table it for now, but I think it's something that we can definitely look at, and I don't think it's an unreasonable request. Let's just see if we can find a decent way to do it.
That's all I ask.
All
right, what do we got next?
I'm not sure if this was a separate question. I saw something.
Microphone.
I saw something from Adam Harrington. I'm getting a delay on my chat now.
You're good now. Keep going.
Was this a question? It said Steel Life Essence plus Wounding or FOD is rape. Is that a question from Adam?
That's a statement.
Is it a concern you have?
It's really
I think he was
good.
just commenting on the necromancy issue, right?
Well, essentially, if you took all finger deaths, all woundings, and all ravages.
I don't think we can hear you. I can't hear you. We're waiting for Raven to figure out how to use his mic.
Better. Better.
Not really.
All right, try talking again.
YOLO.
Can other people hear him? Is it just me for some reason?
He's real quiet.
All right, we'll figure out your problems and then we'll come back to you. Let's go to the next one.
Saul has a question involving Enlightened Soul. If I remember right, Saul, you had problems with your mic. Have it fixed now, or do you want us to read it? I'm assuming his mic is still bad. All right, his question is, could Enlightened Soul be changed to a spirit magic? As it stands, I see it used in smaller parts to gums as a poor man's promag, but I think the naming more fits spirit than it currently is. Gum being greater undead minion.
Wait, okay, hang on, back up. So I thought the question was about Enlightened Soul, so where did Gum come in?
It's part of the same statement he wrote. Literally, that's what he wrote. As it stands, I see it used in smaller parks to greater undead minions as a poor man's promag.
As in throwing Enlightened Soul on a greater undead minion is so that they're Enlightened Soul. It sounds like the concern is that greater undead minions shouldn't be able to wear Enlightened Soul as well.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that's problematic. Does anyone have any feedback about that being problematic or unbalanced?
He continues, it's cheaper to use Greater Undead Minion and Enlightened Soul to make armies of curb stomping into small and to mid-sized parks than it is to make an army of Greater Undead Minion and Promag players. Greater Undead Minions are cursed, so they can't have Spirit Magic, which would make Enlightened Soul invalid if it were a Spirit Magic.
Okay, I understand your concern, but given the changes we just made to Undead Minion, I'm not really comfortable making another modification to depower it like right now. Do you guys feel any different, Cord, Mentor, and Roger?
I agree. And actually, I thought it was a pretty creative use of the spells anyway.
My gut reaction is I think it's okay. The only issue as I think about it is it makes it very, very hard to pop that undead minion because you can't pop him out of insubstantial. You have to kill him with something phase.
Yeah, sure, Bowen, go ahead.
So I think first of all, I think it's kind of corner case because it requires a scout or stack. But Dispel Magic will get rid of it just fine. And I think that, to be honest, Greater Undead Minion with Enlightened Soul is less scary than some of the things that Druid can put on the field.
Well, you can do it naturally with a monk, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
We run into that. It's one of the better uses of Undead Minion. It's actually not that overpowered. Of course, a monk can't wear armor.
Yeah, but I mean, you can still dispel it off.
Sure. I'm saying like your worst case scenario is, let's see, a warrior in 6 points who pops Blessed Armor beforehand, so he retains it because it's a trait, and then he gets gummied, right? And then he's got Enlightened Soul. So that's pretty rough, but you could dispel him, you can heat his weapons, you can pyrotechnic him, you can beat him to death. See, you can release him because release is a range of touch, right? Yeah, so you can still kill him. It's not that bad. I mean, it's pretty brutal. Like, I wouldn't want to run into it in a dark alley or anything, but I don't think it's broken. Bowen, what do you think about that?
That seems reasonable to me.
Alright, cool. Adam, do you have your shit working now?
Do I?
You do. Do you want to go ahead and do your thing?
So, essentially, if I was playing a Necromancer, right? Or not Necromancer, a Warlock, and I took only Woundings, Finger Deaths, and Ravages, I get, let's say, for instance, 8 per life Finger of Deaths if I really wanted to. plus the per game finger deaths that I naturally have. Because you just cast Ravage on them, then you hit them with wounding, and then they die. It's not necessarily a concern, it's more of just a statement. That's really good.
Healer doesn't get wounding.
No, I meant Wizard, because it said Warlock.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I thought I heard Necromancer in there somewhere.
I did, because I'm an idiot.
Oh, good. I'm glad it wasn't me then. Yeah, I mean, I think that's valid. It's the same thing with Drag Below and whatever the other thing is that makes you stop hold person. Dryad, did you want to say something about this, or do you want to say something about something else? Alright, go ahead.
So I actually played a couple of weeks ago the Warlock 8 Figure of Death for Pyros and everything, and I actually found that while it was really devastating when I could control the battlefield, if I lost control for a moment because Warlock has no defensive abilities, I just died. And it ended up being I was dying almost as often as I was butchering everyone. So it ended up being a net loss for my team because as soon as I went down, everyone else collapsed. I really didn't see it as being as powerful as I even thought it would be. I thought it would be ridiculous, but yeah, I don't see, even with the combos, the whole build being that nasty.
What if... Did you take Battle Mage with it, or did you only take Warlock?
I only took Warlock because I was maximizing the Finger of Deaths.
I think without the Battle Mage, also with it, 'cause I forgot to mention that. Yeah, it's pretty balanced, like you said, or not even that good. But if you combine it with Battle Mage and you put on someone who's innately fast, it gets kind of ridiculous.
If you take Battle Mage and you take Warlock, you've got 1 point for Finger of Death, so I guess you get 2 of them, right?
Sure.
Am I missing something? If you can only do it twice, it's really not that broke, is it?
Yeah, I guess it would be if you wanted 2 or 6, but no. If you have 6 points, that gives you 2 that you could buy. It gives you 4 actually.
If you get Look the Part, you can get up to 4. If you don't have Look the Part, you can only get 2 with Warlock. Because you only get 5 points naturally at 6th level. Have you been cheating?
No, I may have just read Warlock differently.
It doesn't make anything chargeable, it gives double the uses. So if you bought 1 Finger of Death, you would get 2. Since Warlock is 2 points and Battle Mage is 2 points, you can only get 2 Fingers of Death. Possibly you could get 4, if you got your extra Look the Point. Look the Part point, whatever.
Yeah, so if I had 6 points, and I bought both Battle Mage and Warlock, and I purchased 2 Finger Deaths, I'd get 4.
And that's the max you can get out of that combo, yeah. I mean, that's pretty good, but it's not something you can rule the field with indefinitely.
Well, it's not just the Finger Death, because you also have Ravage and Wounding. So if you cast like Ravage 3 times on 3 different people, wounding those guys, and you still have your Finger Deaths, you can all cast those while moving. It seems pretty good in my opinion.
I think it is pretty good. I think it's just very limiting, but, you know, try it, break it, bring back feedback, ruin it. Alright, what's the next one we got?
Steven has a question regarding charging, only being able to charge 1 magic ball.
Cord, Medra, and Roger, when you guys are up.
I'll go. The biggest reason is that, I think there's a few reasons. One, charging multiple magic balls is not terribly useful. It's not very useful against multiple opponents, and even in V7, since we included a line that says multiple magic ball hits to one location only act as one hit, I think our biggest thought was that it's not terribly necessary, especially given that you can now carry 40 magic balls at a time if you want to do a full magic ball build. I just don't see it as being terribly useful. If there's something we're missing, if there's a real reason why it needs to be there, open to hearing ideas, but I think our thought was it wasn't used very often even in V7, and that it wasn't a huge loss to not be able to do it.
Steve, you got any commentary or any more clarification you'd like to ask for? Steven, do you have a mic? All right, cool. One thing that I do see floating around, which I'd like to address before we go any further, is whether or not we're going to allow shield bashing. This is an ironic conversation because no, we're not, and the people that you think would be against it are not the people that are against it, and the people that you think are for it are not the people who are for it. So, but no, we're not.
Good to know.
Goran has been... Sorry, I didn't mean to...
I just wanted to touch base a little bit on the concept of shield bashing. When we were trying to... The combat rules were something that we were trying very hard to make sure were pretty much consistent between V7 and V8. What we actually tried to do here is basically just take the way that different areas actually play it and try and actually meld it together. For instance, what we actually show in the rulebook right now as far as like shield on shield contact, that sort of thing, that's stuff that in a lot of kingdoms has actually been pretty much standardized practice. And then in some kingdoms it's been very much a taboo. And so what we basically tried to do is just say, okay, we're not going to try and make combat any harder than where we are currently, but we do want to make sure that you don't run into a situation where something that's perfectly legal in one kingdom is going to be completely prohibited in another. So we wanted to clarify exactly what was acceptable or what was within the acceptable range for everyone across the board. So no, we do not intend to actually allow you to bowl people over. I don't think that was ever anything that anybody was discussing. I'm a little bit smaller guy, and I was one of the ones who was more of a proponent of a little bit more aggressive tactics. But I don't think we were ever at the point where we were going to allow you to bowl people over.
Yeah, we were at the point where we were going to allow you to shield rim people in the helmet and then laugh at them, but that's as far as it got, and we decided not to. All right, Roger, what do we got next?
Goran has been saying he wants to touch on warriors for some time now, so take it away, Goran.
I'm just wondering if you guys are looking at anything to address the idea that warriors are so susceptible to crowd control from so many different classes. It just seems that anybody who wants to deal with a warrior has a hard and fast tool to do that the warrior really cannot avoid.
Does shake it off not address?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you know, the vast majority of the time where I feel like warrior would be the most beneficial is in a, you know, an objective kind of game where they're either trying to protect an area or defend something. And I mean, like I play capture the flag. I play a warrior, and I sit in front of that flag, and no matter what happens, no matter what I want to do, there's like 7 out of 10 classes that can shut me down long enough to just walk right around me, do whatever they want to do, and get out.
So, Goran, I think the answer to that question about whether or not we're actually looking at stuff, we're definitely looking at things because we have gotten a significant amount of feedback regarding Warrior. The problem is we don't want to make changes too quickly. We want to see what the changes we're actually making play out as during playtest. And then if that ends up not really meeting the requirements that we needed, we definitely have some other items on the table that we are considering and that we've been discussing back and forth. But at this point, I personally want to get a little bit more feedback from people who have actually gone out there and really used Shake It Off and True Grit in a battle game situation. I know you have, and I appreciate that, but like I've noticed that a lot of other individuals have said, oh, I haven't played Warriors since those were actually implemented. So I really want to see a little bit more there before I guess, implementing anything more and potentially going too far.
Sure, and I can totally appreciate wanting to let things play out for a while.
Can you talk a little bit about how Shake It Off is not meeting the needs of overcoming CC?
Well, my park is fully embraced V8, and so there's very little confusion as to how the rules work and things like that. So the games tend to be very fast, and 15 seconds is, all the time in the world as far as any game with objectives goes. If it's not just straight up killing people, in 15 seconds you can accomplish pretty much anything you want to accomplish. And so when they throw a spell at me, I spend the 1 or 2 seconds deciding whether or not I want to use Shake It Off and actually, invoke it. Then I've got 15 seconds to sit there and watch them walk away with my flag.
Okay, so that's actually something we went round and round about, and the 15 seconds, consider that like a starting point for the conversation in terms of how long that lasts, because 15 seconds is a number that shows up nowhere else in the game, so we're not tied to it. So do you think that number needs to be lower? Do you think it should be instantaneous? The reason we didn't go with instantaneous is because we don't want there to be arguments about blowing off a crowd control or a hold person or something like that, and then someone immediately saying, shake it off, and then keep running, essentially. We want to make sure that there's a definite pause there so everyone knows what's going on. So could you comment a little bit about what you think those interactions are and what you think would work better for that mechanic?
If lowering it would make it, at least make your opponents have to work a little bit harder to get around you. If we were to lower it to anything, I would say 5. 5 seconds is enough for someone to say escape the warrior, or but it's not enough time for them to just run right around them and ignore them.
Okay. Well, presumably you'll be playing Amtgard either tomorrow or Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Well, try it at 5 seconds for one game, try it at 15 seconds for another game, and post on the V8 Facebook and let us know if that feels better.
Sure, and I kind of like Raw's suggestion there of 7 seconds, since there's a similar number in the book somewhere else.
Oh yeah, right after death. Well, try a variety of things. If you're going to play 2 or 3 games or whatever, try one at 15, try one at 7, try one at 5. See what works, because our goal really is kind of what you stated. We want the caster to still be able to get away, right? Mostly because it avoids an argument, but we still want Warrior to be able to not be forced out of a situation or not be made useless. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And just I have one last follow-up question. Have you guys given any consideration to Randall's hold the line ability?
We have, and the problem, and I'm not speaking for the other guys because I think they have other opinions about it. The problem that I've got with it is I don't think it's going to be terribly useful, because being stopped turns out to be a giant pain in the ass. It's one of the more onerous things that we can apply to people. So I'm trying to get things that I think will be more useful rather than that. And then Cord, Medrin, and Roger may have other feedback, which I'd be interested in hearing.
I think in the right battle game scenario, it could be useful. I think in most of them it wouldn't, but I could see it being something that would tie into something you would associate with Warriors in the right type of battle game.
And I think my concern is that it's either not terribly useful or kind of a pain in the butt and not something people will use, or it is, oh my god, rule the day, it's all over. So for example, if you're doing a hold the line situation where you've got a gate and the warrior just parks himself in the middle, being stopped doesn't make any bit of difference to him. So there's not really a negative to him at all. Whereas if you're playing an open field capture the flag game, I don't know that it ever actually gets used. So I think it's either mostly useless or way overpowered, and there's not really any, depending on the game design, and there's not really any middle ground. And so I'm not certain if it's worthwhile.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so for those of you, or for those people who might actually be listening after this, the hold the line ability idea was basically that the bearer is actually stopped, but gains enlightened soul. So basically they can't move, but they can't really be affected by verbal magic. We did discuss it. We discussed multiple different variations on what we could actually do with that sort of scenario. But as B said, stopped is incredibly obnoxious for the individual who actually does it. I cannot imagine anybody really wanting to do that and only have the ability to do melee fighting. I mean, we've got a couple of the turret type enchantments where they basically have additional options available to them with range to keep people away from them. But we didn't really think it'd work all that well for warrior. We looked at maybe radius movement, we looked at maybe slow movement, that sort of thing, and none of it really seemed like it was going to really work well enough to make it a usable ability in more than a hold a specific area, like hold a gate in a castle battle, something like that sort of ability.
And in those situations, it felt a little overpowered, which I guess touches back on what Medrin said. And this is conceptual. I mean, if for some reason we get to the point where we've tried other stuff with warrior and it doesn't work, we'll try hold the line. It's just we'd really like something that is more generally useful rather than specifically useless or specifically overpowered.
I don't.
And I can appreciate that.
If somebody wanted to actually try to play test a hold the line thing and just give us feedback on what it did, I mean, I wouldn't mind that either.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I think what we were kicking around is you end up stopped for 30 seconds and enlightened soul for 30 seconds concurrently.
And have you guys considered increasing the frequency of ancestral armor?
We have considered it. I think it's at 2 per refresh right now. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so there's 2 parts to that. First of all, we just did increase the frequency of it in the sense that it now comes back with Resurrect and it now comes back with True Grit. So we've increased the frequency of it from that perspective. And I'd be open to making it more frequent, like moving it up to 3 or 4 or whatever it needs to be at to be balanced. But we need to get some more feedback on how the True Grit with the change to a trait affects it. So we'd probably look at doing that probably in a month or 2.
Okay, and how has the feedback been on True Grit?
Minimal at this point, unfortunately, and that's one of the reasons why I was saying that I personally am a little hesitant to really do a whole lot more with Warrior, is because we've had very little feedback on True Grit and Shake It Off at this point. So, I mean, if we can get more people to actually play Warrior and provide that for us, we'd love it. But I haven't seen a significant amount of that, or at least enough for us to be able to get some general trends out of it.
Okay.
Yeah, the feedback we've got. Yeah, the feedback we've got on Warrior so far is we've got feedback from you, and we've got feedback from Randall. And Randall said Shake It Off was great, and I forgot to use True Grit. And we've got feedback from you. And what is your feedback on True Grit? Your feedback on Shake It Off we've got, but what's your feedback on True Grit?
It feels incredibly out of place for the Warrior. It just feels weird, kind of bringing myself back to life. I haven't seen any problems with the Warrior class that True Grit specifically solves, other than I don't have to die. And so it's sort of odd. I don't really like it.
Is it thematically odd or mechanically odd, if that makes sense?
Oh no, it makes total sense, and the answer to that is both. I mean, thematically, it doesn't make any sense for the Warrior to bring himself back to life. I mean, if you were to give it to, like, say, Paladin, okay, I could buy that. And systemically, it doesn't. There's no reason for it. I mean, what problem with the Warrior, set of abilities does it solve?
Getting finger of death, getting getting verbal magic to death, getting nuked from a distance. Thematically, when we were coming up with it, I really thought of it as too tough to die, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of get that. I guess so. To me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it feels out of place. But let me play with it some more, and I'll get you guys some more feedback.
I know when I was thinking about it, the problem that I was specifically trying to solve was staying power on the field, because one of the hallmarks of Warrior is you have the ability to stay on the field more than the rest of the classes, which in V7 was represented by the fact that you have more lives. Well, we don't have any lives in V8. So what can we do to kind of represent the fact that you're going to be around more than other people? And True Grit, was a way to do that, in the sense that you're not respawning, so you're not losing a life out of a life pool. It's much quicker than a death count or having to run back to base, because it's only 30 seconds or however long it is. So that's kind of the mechanic that we were trying to achieve. So does that kind of make more sense?
No, that makes sense. Although I don't know, like where we play, death counts are frequently between 30 and 60 seconds, so it doesn't seem like a huge advantage or difference other than where you respawn.
Yeah, that's certainly true. But where you respawn can be pretty valuable, depending on the size of the field and depending on whether or not you respawn behind enemy lines.
Well, and remember that you become frozen, and as soon as that frozen state is over, you're back to life, meaning if somebody can pop a quick release on you after you've used True Grit, you're back to life that fast.
Or you can shake it off.
Fair enough. And I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good point. And have you guys thought about having it do any kind of, well, I guess, it wouldn't be right for it to do any kind of repairs or anything.
Well, actually, we have kicked something around about doing a limited mend or a limited repair or something like that, and it wouldn't be something major. It would be maybe an immediate use of scavenge or something like that. But mechanically, again, we're just holding off until we get some more feedback, incremental changes.
Okay. I do lament our loss of the greater mend a lot, though.
Blame Randall.
I will do that the next time I see him.
So I'm interested in the fact that you actually said that, because most of the feedback that we'd actually gotten prior to removing it was that with Scavenge, Greater Mend seemed utterly useless. So do you actually think that it was a pretty significant benefit for you?
Oh, I used it pretty much every opportunity I had. The Scavenge is great. You're killing a bunch of unarmored guys, whatever. You get 1-to-1, and then you got a couple of more powerful guys, or a barbarian that comes up and smacks the crap out of you, and then you disengage, and you greater mend your torso, and you jump right back in. And it was I used it all the time.
Speaking of Scavenge, Saul, who doesn't have a mic, asked. He has said he's playtested Warrior at 6th level, and he wants to know if we're planning on rebalancing Scavenge with Ancestral Armor.
I think he said he rescinded that question based off of my earlier response of we don't want to make too many changes to Warrior too quickly. But that being said, I don't remember us having any conversations regarding that at this point. Can you just post here in the comments or something like that what your specific concern is with regard to that? And actually, Saul, if you want to do that, why don't we go ahead and move on to the next question here to give him time to actually write up what he's talking about.
All right, next question is from Jequin, aka Joshua. Wants to give some feedback on Warrior and Battle Mage combo.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's a rather limited experience, but doing that combo actually, it can be cheesy in a way, especially if you have enough teammates backing you up while you're pulling it off. But with the way I play and the way a lot of other people I know play, it's more of a lone wolf or a kind of a two-person teamwork kind of a thing, and it's much more difficult to pull off the ravage and wounding combo when you're in a smaller group. So I don't feel that it's too overpowered, and it's especially not overpowered if you just take the warlock by itself, because not being able to cast ambulant while you're doing that is extremely detrimental to pulling off that combo.
Okay, good feedback. Roger, pull up the next one, and I'm actually going to hit the head real quick, so Cord, Medrin, you can field whatever it is.
All right, before we actually get to the next one, though, let's go ahead and get back to Saul's question. So he said in the comments, I believe Scavenge makes ancestral armor self-sustaining in a group where a good fighter is fighting magic casters. Yes, that's part of the point, is that not only do you have the ancestral armor, but you also have the ability, if you are consistently in combat, to be able to get that ancestral armor back. And it can be very powerful dependent on what sort of field makeup you're actually seeing. But given a lot of the other feedback that we've actually gotten in that, basically, as Goran said, almost every other class at this point appears to have either a way out to avoid the combat with the warrior, or a way to kill the warrior regardless of the actual ancestral armor. I'm not certain at this point if we want to actually do, again, any sort of rebalancing at this point until we've kind of ironed out everything else that's going on right now.
And he said very fair assessment, so good. All right, our next question, now that Brennan's gone, is about Brennan. No, actually, no. Our next question is from Stephen, who wants to know if we have any thoughts about making Lightning Bolt incur a different state, such as Fragile. Stephen, you want to comment on this?
I think Stephen said he didn't have a microphone. So, Stephen, if you want to go ahead and post your comments, we can go ahead and read them all for you.
He said in the chat that it was only just a thought, and I guess I can understand. I've heard some people say that it doesn't seem to be thematic that lightning bolt stops you, but I would be really hesitant to make lightning bolt make somebody fragile, because an engulfing, reusable, fragile throw ball is pretty powerful. I mean, that eats shield users up left and right. I can understand some of the thematic concerns, especially since there's already a bolt that stops you in place with entangle. But I think lightning bolt being a higher level, having the utility of also being an armor breaking strike is just fine. And I think that making it impart the fragile state would be really pretty overpowered. I don't know. To be fair, there hasn't been any discussion about it, so I don't know if any of the other guys, if Roger or Kent, have any other thoughts on that.
So that's actually not something that we'd ever really considered at this point. I'm just kind of going through my head saying what other sort of options we actually have, and I agree with Medi with regard to Fragile. It's possible that we could actually do something else, like maybe, I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out here, so please don't consider this actually considering it seriously, but just, stunning the person for a certain amount of time or something like that. The problem is really going to be balancing whatever suggestions we actually come up with. So I'm fine with us putting it on the discussion list to see if we feel we need to differentiate lightning bolt enough, what sort of options we'd have, and whether or not that makes things a little bit too powerful or whatnot. But at this point, like I said, it's not something that we had previously considered.
And just a side note, as a design point, lightning bolt matches up with pinning arrow. In fact, they have the same colors for a reason, because they're the same thing. And that's part of why lightning bolt does the stop effect, is because it's a partner to pinning arrow, just like fireball is a partner to destruction arrow. If that's just from the design point of view. And I think if we can certainly talk about it and see. I'm just not certain what we could do that wouldn't be overpowered.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. It's basically wizard.
So I actually had thoughts recently about throwing a stun ball in, and I was probably going to make it like 6th level, if that gives you my opinion of how powerful a stun ball would be.
Hence why I was saying, please don't take that as us actually considering it. I was just throwing it out there.
Someone could do a wind ball.
Sounds like a windbag, but we wouldn't want to have a separate duration on stun that's different than the others, because right now we've got a really nice thing with all the balls being 30 seconds, or sorry, 60 seconds, and all the burbles being 30, with very few exceptions. We could make an exception for a stun ball, but it's probably not worth doing. All right, what's the next one?
Bowen wants to know if we could please give Phoenix Tears to Paladin.
No. Next question.
There you go, Bowen. Somebody actually just posted.
I meant it more as a joke, but I thought that True Grit made some more sense than Pro Magic from a gameplay perspective. I guess in general, my suggestion would be that I just don't feel that Pro Magic on a Paladin with already having Command and Death that they're immune to is a great capstone ability. I don't think it's doing them any favors, especially now that they can't heal themselves.
Well, they can't with Pro Mag on anyways, that's certainly true.
I mean, Pro Mag has its uses, don't get me wrong. I think it's less useful on a Paladin than any other class except for Monk. And it cuts out their ability to use one of their own abilities on themselves. So I just thought, maybe there's a better option for some kind of 6th level ability there that, while keeping the same kind of thematic element for Paladin, isn't cutting out one of their abilities and not really providing much of a benefit in the first place.
What if it wasn't self-only?
That would be phenomenal.
Or just spitballing an idea. This in our original draft of Paladin, the Pro Magic was usable on their equipment only. It wasn't usable on themselves. And now we've gotten rid of equipment enchantments. Getting rid of self-only is an interesting thought. What if it was something more like Greater Harden?
I would kill children to be able to put something like that on my shield.
That kind of impinges on Warrior, though.
It doesn't need to be an immunity. I think that's what I'm saying, is I think Paladins are pretty set for immunities. So I think adding that Pro Mag I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's really something to get excited about. I end up not using it in most games because if I want to heal myself, I'm out of luck. I can't even cancel my own Pro Mag.
That's kind of hilariously true.
I think Paladins should have a kill children ability.
Again, just spitballing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was probably going to take it off topic here, so if you want to go ahead with your question, I can come back.
I was just going to say, I think your point is well taken, and I know there's been some discussion about Paladin and anti-Paladin on the Facebook forums, and one of the things is that we don't want Paladin and anti-Paladin to be overpowered. We don't want them to be too much stronger than any of the other classes, given that they're a prestige class and they're very limited. We would actually prefer them, I think, to be probably a little behind the power curve. And so mucking with it too much, we've got to be really mindful of that. But I certainly wouldn't be opposed to giving them an equipment enchantment, whether it's a harden or I don't know, something that was more useful than the pro magic, given that they have immunity to 60% of the verbals out there. Actually, probably more than that. Probably 75% of the verbals out there right now without the pro mag.
I mean, honestly, if it's any of importance, I would happily take something like Resurrect becomes chargeable over Pro Mag. I think that would be something that's not overpowered. Monks can do it earlier. You've got healers out there doing it, and I think it's much more useful than Pro Magging.
Well, the problem that I see with that is we already have a lot of classes that do it, proportionally speaking, because it's a pretty powerful thing from a gameplay perspective, and we've already got 2 classes that can do it, and Paladin can do it just to a limited extent. But I think the limiting extent is pretty important there.
And that's fair. And I mean, I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be powerful. I don't really care how powerful it is. I mean, I agree with Benjamin. I understand where he's coming from. I think that there's also kind of a general consensus that the people who are playing those classes have clearly more experience in the game, so they're probably better fighters and bringing up, some deficiencies with the stick end as well. I'm less interested in power and more interested in interesting. I just it would be nice to have 6th level, and maybe I'm the odd one out, but it just feels like 6th level Paladin really is 5th level Paladin.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. You're basically saying it's just not worthwhile because it doesn't do anything you don't already get mostly. I'm actually thumbing through this list of stuff now. Let's move on to the next question, and I'm going to keep kind of moving through this list of magical abilities and see if anything jumps out at me.
Well, the next one might be quick. We've got a couple people posting on the Facebook during this chat saying they can't log in, but they want to get some questions in. And since at the moment I don't see anything else from the chat, I'm going to go ahead and relay a few of them. A guy named Richard Arhens wants to know if we are giving any consideration to swapping the white and red sashes for healers and barbarians.
I slept with his mom and it was terrible, so no.
Gonna say no. Next question.
Moving right along.
I didn't actually sleep with his mom. I'm not stupid. But it does come up pretty frequently, and what it comes down to is it's a combination of tradition and not... Like, there's people on both sides of it, and we're going to irritate one set of them either way, so we just chose this, and we've decided to go with it.
And I mean, I've seen a lot of the discussion, red is an offensive color, white's a defensive color. It pretty much, unfortunately, the reality is that those are very Western concepts as far as the coloring is concerned. That doesn't necessarily apply across all cultures, for one. It really is an arbitrary decision between those two. I understand that a lot of people prefer the idea of red over white, but I don't really see the arguments of red's aggressive, white's passive as really being true enough that it really is enough to sway us on that decision. I think tradition really does have a lot to play into it.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, it's no matter what you do, someone will get upset. I mean, white in Chinese is supposed to be a funeral color, death. I mean, so that's not a peaceful, defensive color, as far as I know. So it's going to get people upset one way or the other. I keep threatening anybody who complains about it that will make pink for the next class that objects to it.
Roger, make a note in the document about looking for blessing against harm in place of the pro mag for paladins. We'll discuss that.
By the way, Jiraiya just actually posted in the comments that he demands pink barbarians. I don't know. I'm sold. What do you guys think?
Sold. Action item. Mark in the notes.
That
Is there
that was my original vote, man.
It's a combination of pink and red. Everyone can be upset.
So congratulations, Dry. You have now had a direct effect on something very important within the V8 rule.
There's someone named Julian Searley who has actually posted several multi-part questions on Facebook. If I like, I guess I'm gonna go over the first one.
All right, do that.
The first one is regarding Archer. He writes, one player suggested Archer should be about like a wizard and wants an armor-penetrating arrow which goes through armor and wounds the victim as a specialized arrow, something similar to Sphere of Annihilation for an archer. They would like this in place of both 6th level specialty arrows.
Well, I'd like a giant pile of gold in my living room, but it probably wouldn't be very good for the economy.
The non-flippant answer, although as funny as that is that one of the tenets that we stuck with in designing V8 is that there are very, very, very few things that bypass armor. Armor stops almost everything. The only exception that I can think of is Sphere of Annihilation, and that's because it's a 6th level 2-point magic. And given that archers have such a higher range than a wizard, and in most cases better speed and accuracy on the weapon that's flying, I think that would be amazingly overpowered.
Okay, the next one he writes is Anti-Paladin Paladin. One of his Paladin/Anti-Paladin players would like for Paladin and Anti-Paladin to be more defined in terms of roles. He writes, no good guy or bad guy more than weak assassin/necromancer and healer/warrior. Right now they're weak and mostly pointless. He asked for clarification of specifics and mostly got this. The player feels that Paladin and Anti-Paladin lack a definite role. The player suggests Paladin and Anti-Paladins should be linchpins or rally points for a team. The player said Paladins feel better than Anti-Paladins as Paladins can share immunities. APs feel like weak Necromancer mixed with weak Assassin with a little more armor. He writes Paladins aren't bad but may need minor tweaking upwards. He liked the idea that came across the board that said that Paladins might be better if they could give out 2 flavors of their immunities at once. Currently shared immunities is an either or thing. Paladin would be better if they could hand out both immunities at once, but not to the same player. This actually goes on for quite a bit here. I don't know if this is... I don't want to go on at too much length. I've posted it in our document. I don't know if we want to address the whole thing. But basically he feels that Paladin and Anti-Paladin aren't well enough defined and they're useless.
Well, and I think that comes back to what Medrin was talking about earlier, which is they're intentionally kind of underpowered. Cord, do you want to comment on that too? I know it's one of your things.
Yeah, so I think that the feedback that we're getting on that is not just that they're underpowered, but I have actually seen a decent amount of feedback that basically has said that they're boring to play. Now, we do want to make sure that we actually are not making the classes boring. We don't want to discourage people from playing the class. What we do want to do is make sure that those individuals who are have the most experience and are liable to be some of the powerhouses on the field, we want to make sure that they actually are balanced based on who's playing the class as well. So, I mean, I think that feedback is probably good for us, and that it means that we probably still have to go back to the drawing board to try and make Paladin and Anti-Paladin interesting to play. But I really am a little loath to do anything further as far as beefing them up considerably, just because of the fact that we do kind of want them to be a little bit behind the power curve.
All right, what's the next one?
This question comes on Facebook from Amon Ra Valencia. Given the huge amount of armor breaking from berserk, arrows, and enchantments, are we finding lots of people that aren't bothering to go out on the field with 3 points of armor, not being worth the bother versus what you get out of 1 or 2 points? I guess that's a feedback, not a question.
Let's see. Yeah, I think that one got answered in the actual chat. I think Randall had a pretty good answer to that. Kind of broke it down by a chart as to what's useful and what's not. Unless we have kind of more questions specifically coming out of the group or things that we haven't answered yet, I'd really like to give a chance for people to give their feedback or their observances so far and what they've played. If anyone would like to do that or share what they've experienced or share any of the response to any of the changes they have, or if anyone has any concerns or comments about V8 in general that they want to give to us, this would be a fantastic time to do that.
Actually, there's one question I skipped from the chat, and that was Mesreth wanting to know that he said we talked about adding Javelin to Scout. Wanted to know if we ever decided for or against that.
Oh, I think we discussed it, and we just haven't made a decision about it yet. Because I know we had some discussion. I don't remember where it went, and then it just kind of fell to the bottom of the forum we were looking in, so it just didn't make it back up into the changelog, essentially. So there's really no movement on it, but it hasn't been dismissed. If that makes sense.
Unless I missed something, that's everything we got.
All right, so someone give us some feedback. Tell us what you like about V8. Tell us what you don't like about V8. Complain about the charge incantation. We'd really like some feedback on that, actually.
Roger, I see a couple more questions at the bottom of our discussion document, the Google Doc.
The rest of those ones were from the Facebook or from ESAM. They were not ones from the people that are here. I mean, we can still go over them.
In the meantime, Bowen wants to share his experiences.
Happy to do so. For those who don't know me, I'm Bowen. I'm from Goldenville proper out here in New Hampshire. And we've been playtesting V8 since the armor rules came out. We started it once a month, and we're up to once a week after last rain. I playtested Monk pretty extensively, Paladin pretty extensively, and Druid to some extent. I think Monk is right where it should be. Like I was saying, I think on ESAM the other day, I wish that they had Old Sanctuary. I understand why they don't. It's a little bit of a different dynamic than it is in V7, but I think it's the right one. As opposed to casters and things like that. In general, very happy with Monk. Druid, I got some more playing in this week against Akrith, who's another person out here playing Druid in GV. Has been playtesting V8 since it came out. And he rolled with a Summoner Druid. I ran with a Ranger, and I took a lot of Dispels. And I thought it was a really interesting way to have a class that was playing exactly opposite of each other and both being very, very effective. So that was a really neat thing. That's not something that I think V7 offers. And despite being a 6th level Druid in V7, I haven't played the class since I hit 6th level before V8 came out. I just was no longer interested in the class by the time I hit 6. Finally, I've played Paladin quite a bit in V8, and I think I talked about that enough on this call. I think 1 through 5, it's amazing. 6th level, a little underwhelming, but it's right where I kind of want it to be. I can use a little bit of armor. I don't have, armor-breaking weapons, anything like that. My shield can still be destroyed, and I've got a solid support role that I can play in the team while also being, someone who can get up and grind, with basically anybody but a warrior and come out, reasonable. So the only thing that I really have had an issue with, and I talked to Medrin a little bit about this a couple months ago, but I think that while I understand the concepts behind the armor design, I think that 1 point of armor is really, really, really useful against anybody who's shooting a bow that isn't an archer. And while I understand the idea of we don't want a lot of things to go through armor, I feel like that's one of the 2 major complaints that I see in my area about V8, both of them being armor. One of them being that low-level armor is too good, and the other one being the maximum of +1, which I think comes up all the time and has been answered numerous times.
So, who's saying that that 1 point of armor is too good? Is that archers saying it sucks that we're not one-shotting people?
It's not, well, I mean, it's tough, right? Because archer is a term and it's a class. So I don't see it from the class archer because they have tools that get around the fact that somebody's wearing armor and at least impair some effect on them. You know, they can pin them, they can suppress them. You know, if they catch an arm, they poison them. You know, whatever. I tend to see that feedback more from uh, maybe what we would call secondary bow users. Um, Not that I necessarily think Scout is one of them, but Scout is the one that comes to mind that people feel that there was a lot of oomph lost in the archery element of Scout, you know, as well as you know, Druid not having you know, any specific way around that. You know, they got to take Ranger. I mean, there's some arguments there. I don't necessarily think that it's game breaking. I just think that it's going to be one of those hurdles that's going to come up, and I think that I don't know. I think it would be nice if there was some kind of specific response to it.
Like what? I mean, what kind of solutions do you think would fix that problem?
Uh, Man, I think if Scout had some effect that they could transmit through an arrow, if they got a pinning arrow at 6th level, and I'm not saying necessarily that they need to get, you know, everybody needs to get something or something like that, but I think that as far as the complaint for my end is that people feel, and again, I'm usually on the other side of this. Like I said, I'm from New Hampshire. We all have winter garb out here. My winter garb is head to toe padded armor, and I abuse that against anybody who's not an archer where we're playing V8. You know, I'll take, you know, 5 arrow shots while I'm running in on someone if I can line up the shots right, and that can be really frustrating for that person. So having something like Roger offered, you know, the scorpion arrow, you know, the I think having something that's extended through the arrow. For Scout, I guess Assassin has coup de grace that they could do after an arrow, but I think for Scout specifically might be helpful as far as the complaints that I'm seeing in regards to how powerful 1 point of armor is.
Okay, that makes sense. And then obviously we've got the other armor issue that we haven't really discussed yet. But cool, great feedback.
Okay. All right, so we do have a question about what we're doing with armor, and I'm going to actually hand this over to Cord, and he can talk about where we are with that and what we're considering.
Okay, so at this point, we don't have any firm decisions made as far as any of the options that have actually been presented with regard to armor. To be perfectly honest, a lot of the items that we actually are seeing brought up as potential suggestions are items that through the design process were really discussed, were really hammered out, and were actually ones that we decided to move away from when we went with the current system. So there's a lot that we really have to look at whenever we're looking at a lot of those changes, because really the concept of the armor breaking is one of the base fundamentals of the entire design process. And if we do anything that really is going to significantly change that or change the power structure based on that, it's something that can have drastic effects on pretty much the entire system. There are a couple of options that we are actually looking toward to try and boost the or gives people some sort of incentive to actually make high quality armor. We're looking at potentially doing a non-point bonus for like a masterwork type of armor or something like that, so that if people really go above and beyond and create an amazing set of armor, they get some sort of bonus for it besides just looking really spiffy on the field. But we're looking at doing that in a non-point sort of setup, so that it gives some sort of additional benefit without necessarily counterbalancing the points on the armor. as far as the other options, like for instance, I think Ryu actually mentioned the option of doing kind of a diminishing returns sort of setup, where to get an additional point of armor you had to do 2 points. To get an additional 2 points you had to make however many additional points, that sort of thing. My concern there would just be how complicated that is and how many additional modifiers we would have to actually provide to be able to get any sort of major benefit out of it. But I mean, it's something we'll bring to the table and look at. The +2 for metal armors, again, it's something we're looking at, although there are some concerns on the committee about that sort of thing. So we really are looking at a whole bunch of things, but again, it is something where we have to look significantly deeper than just that one area because of how much the whole concept affects everything else in the game.
I don't know if there's an official forum or something. I'm not like really a part of this. Am I allowed to make a comment, or am I just listening?
Open the chat thing, and you can basically flag for attention. The chat button should be on the right, third one down. Don't click disconnect. There you go. But since you spoke up, why don't you just make a comment?
Well, you were talking about armor, and I've been in this game for nearly 15 years, and when I started, I liked the fact that Amtgard was accessible to people who didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I fought in the days of, soda tab armor, and I miss the accessibility of armor, because I live in Florida, and if you don't have money, you're not wearing armor. I've never seen plate mail on the field.
Okay, that's an observation. Do you have? Could you kind of spell out for us how that references what we're talking about, or the positive or negative of that versus V7 versus V8?
You were talking about giving increase. I heard you were saying about giving. I don't even know how to explain it. He said to giving like an increase, something increased for the better quality armor. 2 points. Like extra points for quality armor, and I agree. I've thought about making armor, but I can't really afford to make the materials without losing so many points. It's not even worth it. If you're talking about balancing armor, I think that there should be a way to make armor more accessible to the public, to the general people on the field.
Well, okay, so that's an interesting concept, and it's actually something we wanted to do in V8, is we wanted to promote the use of armor, and this ties into what Bowen was talking about earlier. And one of our other goals was to make the higher end armors that are harder to make, require more effort, require more skills, more tools, blah blah blah, make those worth still making. So what you're talking about is what you made the higher end armor harder to get to, less accessible. And that's true.
No, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that just the opposite, that not to dock as much for lesser quality. I mean, if you want to work hard to make better quality, then by all means, celebrate it. I think it's great, but you're making, you lose so many points for poor quality or poor materials or whatever that it gets to the point that if you can't get good quality, it's not even worth doing. I mean, I thought about doing like a soda tab type armor, but between the materials and the aluminum and the thinness, you lose so many points. You're basically down to 1 point armor after how much work you're going to put into it. I'm not saying, lessen the better quality. I'm saying, make the negatives less negative, I think is what I'm trying to say.
So I find it interesting that you're actually going that route with regard to the discussion, because that brings up one of the biggest difficulties that we've had with regard to the armor sort of situation is there are so many people who think armor should be accessible. We shouldn't have to worry about historical weights. We're a fantasy game. So I mean, that's a really significant contingent of the people who actually play this game. And on the other hand, you have people who are very much of the opinion that no, armor should be historical. It should be quality. It should reflect the amount of work and effort that was actually put into it. There's so many different opinions with regard to armor that trying to actually find a something that's actually going to be acceptable to a wide swath of the populace has been incredibly difficult for us to really do. And we're seeing a lot of vocal opponents to the current system who have a very specific concept of what armor should be, what armor actually needs to be here. And the problem is that if we go too far in one direction, then we've got all the people on the other side who are even more upset because it's stepping further away from their concept of the armor system. So we need to make sure that we're actually doing this in such a way where we're taking all points into consideration and still providing a coherent system that actually works well enough that it's an improvement on what we have currently.
And actually, out of curiosity, how much do you want to spend in time, in terms of time and money, and how many points do you want to get out of it? I'm curious what you think the sweet spot is for you.
Well, I mean, I'm not against spending time. Time is fine, it's just financially. I mean, I hate the idea of I have to go out and spend how much money on the proper materials to make something great, you know? I mean, when Soda Tab was the thing, I spent months walking the street, picking through people's recycling bins, and then building armor, but I don't have access to plate steel and nice leathers, you know? Those things are expensive. I can't afford them. I'm not against making them if I have the time and the materials. I just can't afford them.
Okay, well, I mean, do you have a budget for armor that's greater than free, or is free the sweet spot for you in armor, essentially? Like free plus time?
Me personally, free plus time, but I'm not against spending money. Just not a lot of money. I don't personally have access to a lot of money. And for a lot of people I know, there's more important things than Amtgard when it comes to your finances. You know, you got children and bills and everything else.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you on that. It's just, you know, I'm trying to really figure out what would make this work for you, because as people in the chat are observing, you know, you spend $20, you can get a couple points of armor pretty easily. So, I mean, do you think that's, or are you saying that doesn't work for you personally, or do you think that doesn't work for a lot of people? You know, kind of help us out here.
I think it's more of a personal thing that I can't really afford it myself. But they're for $20, I could do armor for $20. You know, I don't want to say absolutely free, but I'm saying a difference between, you know, like I know a guy who got leather welding, you know, gauntlet things for his arms and got those at a hardware store. That kind of stuff is great. But when you're comparing that to the guy who spent $400 on plate mail armor. Or there's a guy at my park who went to the Renaissance Festival and spent, what, $300 on, you know, leather chest plate piece. I mean, there's a big difference.
Yeah, there definitely is. And I mean, the guy who goes and buys, you know, leather welding gauntlets, you know, he's going to get a point or two out of that. I think VA, he get a point out of it. Yeah, the guy who has a lot of money to spend is going to be able to outbuy you in the armor department. That's absolutely true.
I think if you're looking to balance armor, I think that, you know, you should give more points to quality in the extent of what did you do to get the armor versus, you know, did you buy the armor? Because buying leather armor took your wallet, whereas buying blank leather and carving your own armor, I think, deserves a lot more points.
I can see where you're coming from. But at the same time, I kind of disagree with it, because it's hard to say how much effort someone put into it other than to observe the end result. I mean, yeah, someone buying chainmail off of, you know, ThinkGeek or whatever obviously put less effort into the armor, but, you know, if they got the money to do it by mowing lawns for a summer, that's kind of a lot of effort.
Okay, yes, I absolutely agree.
It's hard to balance that out.
Hi, I'm Liliane. I'm also in the same park. We're best friends. But I was in the SCA for about 15 years, and when you mentioned something about trying to make things more authentic, I think if you really want to get authentic, you should go to the SCA, because this is more fun, and to try to make things more authentic in my opinion, is going to ruin what Amtgard is. I mean, I'm not saying don't ever be authentic. I'm just saying that to require it to be more authentic is going to disillusion a lot of people who are, you know, just in it to have fun.
If I could address that, but that's pretty much what Amtgard has been. I mean, and I've heard people comment that Amtgard sometimes gets more picky on materials than SCA does, even on some armor requirements, which seems contradictory. But that's kind of the influence that the armorers have had, and they're very vocal on that position. But you know, it's definitely something to consider. I mean, we do want people to be able to have fun, but other people are, do take their armor work very seriously.
Well, that's one part of it, authenticity. Another part of it is when we're talking about authenticity, we're talking about, at least when I'm talking about authenticity, I'm talking about authentic weight, and that's largely about it. And that's a balance issue. So when I'm saying, chainmail should weigh approximately blah, 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 I'm not saying because it needs to be authentic because it offends me that it doesn't weigh that much, because the thing is we've calibrated it to get a certain amount of protection for a certain amount of loss of mobility and a certain amount of loss in endurance, right? So plastic chainmail rating at 3 points or whatever is, problematic from a balance standpoint, essentially.
Personally, if I could make armor, taking like hockey gear and putting some thin metal plates on it, if it looks good, I'm willing to give it a few points.
Well, and so are we. I mean, V8 actually allows for synthetic armor. If you're willing to take hockey gear and throw, some metal plates on it, you're going to get a couple of points out of it. I mean, I think we're on the same page there. If a kid goes down to Play It Again Sports and buys catcher mix and he plates it with, 20 gauge steel, which he picked out of the side of a computer case or something like that, he's going to get a couple of points out of it.
Right, we're just saying don't silver paint spraying it,
Well, but anyways, your points are well taken, but we are kind of running out of time, so we do need to move on to some other stuff. Do you have any closing statements that you'd like to make on that?
Not on my end. No, we're good. Thank you for hearing us out.
That's what we're here for. It's the point. All right, what's the next one we got? Who's the next poison? Yeah, right. Who's the next person up?
There was a comment from Quarpek, or aka Dark Moon, wanted to ask for timer reduction with some abilities. Quarpek, you want to comment on that?
I was just thinking that multiple classes on the field, such as, i.e. like 3 or 4 warriors being on there, being able to reduce the time of things such as like true grit, or the other things, thus gaining or other abilities with it.
It's an interesting concept. It's one we really haven't considered much. As I mentioned in chat, Bard does some stuff kind of like that, but nothing explicitly like what you're talking about. I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Cord, Medrin? Are you guys dead? That happens.
No, I'm here. I missed that. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Corpec, repeat it.
Basically, having either extra abilities or reducing the timers of multiple of the same class on the field. I.e., you have 3 warriors on the field.
They have a banding.
They can group together to, I don't know, reduce True Grit's delay timer.
I guess the... Sorry, JP.
I think it's an interesting concept, and I'm not even opposed to it in theory. We'd have to kind of work out and see how it would work. The cool thing about V8 is that it would be pretty easy for a game designer to include something like that in there. As in, if you get three people of the same class to go to this, this capture point and do something, they gain this benefit. It's not. I think we'd have to. It's not something we've thought about, or at least not something I've thought about, not something we've discussed. So I think it's an interesting concept. It was sort of like something that somebody put out on the Facebook thing of letting guild masters have powers that applied to other people to let their classmates do something similar. It's an interesting concept.
Gordon, you got anything you want to add, or you good?
So I agree that it's an interesting concept. I would have some concerns about the complexity, because basically what we're saying is, okay, this rule applies in this situation if you have this number of people. However, a separate rule applies in the situation if you have extra people of that given class. And my concern would just be how accessible rules like that would actually make things for use within the game. And it's something I'd be willing to give more thought to. I'm trying to figure out a way to actually do it where it doesn't actually muddy the waters as far as the length of time that we actually have for different abilities. We're trying to make sure that the abilities have a certain amount of standardization of time frames, and I'm not necessarily sure we want to play with that too much, because then that makes it harder for people to actually remember what time frame applies in a given situation.
I understand that, and I am doing a write-up on it. It may be based more towards abilities, and I will happily send it in to you all. I'll write it up and see where it goes from there.
You might also look at the magic item creation rules. You could look at doing something like creating a magic item that had that type of effect that was given out in your park.
Right, understand.
Okay, we're sneaking up on 2.5 hours here, and I've got other things that I need to do. I've got MechWarrior Online drops I need to get done tonight. So, if anyone has any closing items or anything that they really feel they need to share with us and or make fun of one of us, now's the time. You got about 5-10 minutes. Non-caster archetypes. Okay, so we've had this come up a number of times, and essentially, since archetypes change the way that that classes play excessively, or not excessively, but extensively, we opted not to do it because there's simply not the flexibility inherent in the other classes, and adding it so that there was enough flexibility in other classes would be an enormous departure from the way Amtgard currently works for non-fighting or non-casting classes. Jiraiya leveling as a caster sucks what?
Oh, basically, I've seen, since the entire kingdom started playtesting, I've seen one person actually leveling a casting class, play that class in V8 at its level. And that was a couple of weeks ago, and he was basically a bard with a point of armor and 2 short swords, honor duel, and confidence. And he was joking about how he's just a glorified peasant. A lot of people give me feedback that they don't like leveling caster in V8, especially when the end result is to play a class that is as powerful optimally or slightly more powerful realistically than everyone else. It just doesn't seem like it's worth the year of your time to play something that was useless for a year and is now just as powerful as everyone else. I know we talked about earlier lowering the amount of time it takes to level, but I actually have people giving me concerns about there not being casters if V8 goes live because no one's going to play it.
Do you think that's all casters, or is that Bard specific? Because we've heard some feedback that low-level Bard just really stinks.
I've gotten feedback on low-level healer and wizard having the same one. I know Bard's a lot worse than them, but I have had people leveling healer and Bard who have just walked out on our V8 days and played Barbar or Scout or something because it was so bad that they wouldn't bother picking up the sash for it.
Do you think that if we actually did an accelerated leveling system, like what we talked about at the very beginning of this, that might help mitigate that issue somewhat?
It would depend on how fast it levels and how willing people are to put up with basically being weaker than someone else of their level as a melee or, well, non-casting class for that time. So if it was like 4 months where I'm, weaker than everyone else, I can see a lot of people putting up with that. But it was just more the end result is a class that's as powerful as everyone else, but that intervening time you're weaker than everyone else is turning a lot of people off to playing casters.
I need to put some comments in there since Troy and I are more or less from the same parks when it comes to V8. A lot of the we don't have a lot of people who are playtesting casters in general, and I think that's part of it. I think that speeding up the leveling will help some. I think also though that some of those casters that are actively leveling caster in V7 haven't really gone through the hassle. We've come up with a V8 game and they'd just rather play like Barbarian or something than to do a caster where they don't know it very well.
Do you think this is a concern that has kind of popped up in my head, and I haven't really discussed it with everybody else, so again, don't take this as, oh, we're going to change it. But do you think that the lack of access of equipment at lower levels feeds into that?
To a big extent, yeah, I think it does.
I think it does too. Yeah, it's with casters in particular. I mean, most people that come out to the park, they have a sword, they have probably some other things or a shield, but to play caster, you really got to prep for it.
I think every caster gets a weapon at first level, don't they?
Shorts.
It proportionally costs them more than in V8 in V7 though.
Yeah.
It does at first level.
Yeah, but me personally, it's not that V8's not stopping me from wanting to level casters for V8, but I'm not the same people that Jiraiya is referring to. But there is the whole thing of if you don't have stuff, if you don't have your spell strips, or if you don't have your spell balls or things like that, that can kind of put a bummer on things. But honestly, if you're planning on playing caster, you need to know that stuff ahead of time. Now, if you don't know that stuff ahead of time and you decide, hey, I want to play caster today, well, that kind of sucks for you.
The caster classes are certainly more complicated in terms of what you have to do in order to play them. They're kind of for people who want to get more involved in it.
And I don't disagree. I don't know that there's necessarily a solution. I do think that in some cases, at least with the parks out here, I know that I've been trying to get more casters to play caster, and it really has been a struggle. But that's because most of the people who have an interest in caster have not been quite as interested in playtesting V8, and so it's just I think that might be more of a thing just associated to us with people not being ready or not wanting to learn V8 just yet.
Well, if you're a wizard in V7, you really have no particular interest in playing in V8, unless you're a really good wizard, in which case you'll still be a really good wizard in V8. But whatever. Okay, anyone else? Anything else? Last call, last call.
My park actually kind of mirrors that same experience as far as the casters go. We still don't play test for anything, and the main gripe about that is the way that the spells and everything has changed from V7 to V8, and that's all from the veterans at the park that like to play caster, not wanting to relearn everything. But that's more of a personal thing against them than what's actually going on with V8, so it's just a thing I have to deal with here locally.
Yeah, and we're going to run into a lot of that. Honestly, you know, some people are just going to go, well, I'm not going to learn it until I absolutely have to learn it. Because that's just, you know, people are change averse. There's some amount of human nature there. Some people are just lazy. Some people don't want something different or whatever. You know, even if they really believe the system was 100% better, they might not be interested in learning it just because it takes work and they know what they have, right? There's not a whole lot we can do about that except be patient and believe we have a good product and try and make it accessible.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, well, I'm going to wrap that up. We're just at the 2.5 hour mark here. I am going to turn this into a file and share it out so people who weren't here can struggle through our 150 minutes of misery. Thank you very much for all attending. Thank you, Cord, Medrin, and Roger, for taking time out of your Friday nights and backing me up. I know Medrin, you know, had his kid with him, as we heard several times. I appreciate him tuning in. And thank all of you guys for coming. Obviously, the V8 project would be nothing without people participating in it. So, I hope to see all of you again next time, and I've really had a good time.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys.